Hi friends, host Eric here. Host Talking with Famous People. There's been a little bit of fallout, I guess you could say, from the C.S. Joseph video I made yesterday. And that fallout might be described as a bunch of nonsense response and rebuttal that doesn't amount to anything as far as I can tell. The gist of the response, hi King Krishna Sarmapagu, the gist of the response from what I can tell has been that I didn't really make any points, that I just maybe was engaged in personal attacks myself or something, that I didn't have any meaningful critiques. So make sure to articulate that I did make some meaningful critiques there, and I have plenty more meaningful critiques to make as credibility of a source, and whether or not we can dismiss somebody based on elements about themselves, or whether we have to actually address their arguments. So that was a point I made, and it was warranted. I said that we ought not do this for moral reasons. As you know, number one, we oughtn't condemn people for their worst mistakes, or if they did make a bad mistake. And number two, that it's not relevant to the argumentation that's being addressed at all. So therefore, we ought not consider those irrelevant factors, because it's just going to muddy the issue. So I made those points, and from what I can tell, from those individuals who've responded to the video and it says, here's how Eric failed or something, their primary critique is that I didn't make any points or something, but I did make those points, and so I don't know why they would say such a thing. Angantir, hello. Overall, I think in the comment chain, the response has been broadly on my side, I guess, more so perhaps than I even anticipated. But I know that in these CSJ forums and such, there's been some amount of pushback towards it. So I want to stress that, first of all, if you think I haven't adequately critiqued C.S. Joseph, or haven't actually made points or arguments or something like that, remember I have a very long video in which I articulate a bunch of different elements of cognitive functions that run afoul of C.S. Joseph's self-identification as the ENTP. But I want to make an additional point. C.S. Joseph is basing his understanding of what extroverted intuition is and what introverted thinking is based on the assumption that he's an ENTP. So he believes that his own tool function is introverted thinking. What he's doing is introverted thinking. But introverted thinking is that thing I'm doing with my tool function all the time. I'm C.S. Joseph. Hi, Amber Thrasher. Always a great, great pleasure to have you grace us with your presence here on these live streams. I must say, makes for a very special Wednesday evening. It's also Kimberly's birthday, so there you go. I'll let her know that you were thinking of her today, Amber Thrasher. So the thing is, maybe I was obviously not very professional in my critiques. I'm getting a bonger for you here right now, Amber. We're almost basically out of weed, but I think I can scrape together a bonger or two out of the dregs of things. So it's like, okay. If you're going to be a typology expert and you're going to make claims about how you can type people successfully, and also all about how personality links to being different expressions of the self, that there's four sides of the self. Sometimes you're in your shadow INTJ self, or whatever that means, you know. She's not in the room at the moment, but thank you for saying so, Chaco and Angantu and King Krishna Sarmapagu. The thing is, his understanding of cognitive functions and of type, therefore, is based on the notion that what he's doing most of the time in his nature is extrovertedly intuitive, and his tool function is introverted thinking. So naturally, he's going to spot somebody doing what he's doing with his tool function and think, that's introverted thinking. Except, of course, he's not doing anything remotely close to introverted thinking at all. He's just relating facts that he understands to be facts that aren't actually facts, but he's not parsing it for consistency. He's not checking it for logical soundness in any sense of the word. Hi there, Taylor. This bummer goes out to you, Amber Drasher. I hereby transubstantiate. So I think that's the most important thing to remember of C.S. Joseph is he's fundamentally wrong about his construct of cognitive functions. He believes the thing he's doing all the time is extrovertly intuiting, but it's not. For anybody who knows anything about extroverted intuition, who's an extroverted intuitor themselves, or just understands cognitive functions well, or has met a real extroverted intuitor, can know in very short order that C.S. Joseph is not an extroverted intuitor. That's not playful extroverted intuition. That's this sort of purposeful bastardization of extroverted intuition. It's either third slot or sixth. If it's third slot, he's NI polar, he's ESTJ. If it's sixth slot, he'd be ENTJ. I guess it could be fourth slot. He could be ESFP. I mean that would going to be eighth slot. Then he'd be ESFP. You think he's ENFP? I mean, the thing about C.S. Joseph is the one thing we know for sure is he's not using introverted thinking. Now, he is demonstrating some extroverted intuition. He's not extroverted intuition polar. It might be eighth slot. It might be fourth slot. It might be sixth slot. It might be third slot. Taylor's saying maybe he even first slot. Well, I mean, I don't see any first slot extroverted intuition in the guy. He's not really exploring ideas. He just isn't. He's not ideating. Look, I had this neighbor, Steve, I met him the other day. He's an ENFP, he lives across the street. We chatted briefly about how sometimes song titles and song ideas come from weird places because he's a songwriter and makes his own shit. He saw me the next day. He gave me this list of song ideas he'd come up with based on us sitting on the porch. And showed his phone number. Oops. Sorry, Steve. But, you know, he's a musician, or I guess. I don't know if this is his job or what. Music entertainment. And he gave me a jar of plum jam too, of course. Now that's an ENFP, right? I meet him one day. He spits out a paper full of song titles that are song idea title-y things, not even songs in any sense. We didn't work on them at all, but that we might make based on us sitting on the porch one day. That's an ENFP. Can you imagine C.S. Joseph doing that? I don't think so. I think it looks unrecognizable to you because it's TI polar. Oh, the NE? Well, I mean, like I said, I recognize it in my neighbor across the street. I immediately pegged him as an ENFP. And because we were like, you know, we had that thing that happens where two extroverted intuitors go, we could talk all day. My mate is coming up tomorrow with some, apparently. With some rum and coke? Your mate. That means your wife or your friend. Because, you know, in England, they call your friend your mate. I don't know why they call him that. You won't give anyone the chance to interact in that manner. Okay, well, maybe if I were to interact with him in that, and I'd be convinced of that. I don't know. I don't smell extroverted intuition in the dominant slot, that's for sure. He doesn't feel like it in that channel. He keeps repeating the same things. He's not too worried about novelty. You know, novelty is not driving his thinking. Oh, is there something wrong with the mic? Well, I mean, the problem is this stereo mic set up like it is, then This laptop can't really handle it, but it still sounds better than the other mics. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Friend, bro, etc. Exactly. Okay, so that's what you mean by mate. When I say mate, I mean my woman. I always call friends mates, but I'm born and live in the U.S. Oh. Maybe you should call them blokes instead. He would just say he transitioned, lol. All right, so that's another critique that I want to discuss. This idea that people spend time in their shadow self, or that they've got 4 different selves that they might manifest in different occasions, it represents a fundamental failure to understand what a cognitive function is. A cognitive function is a process, a way of paying attention. It becomes habituated. In other words, you become how you pay attention over time. Reflexively, you pay attention to certain modalities, and therefore necessarily you don't in others. There are a finite number of hours in a day, and I spend most of my attentional energy extrovertly intuiting during the day, and a substantially smaller amount of it doing things that are not extroverted intuition and introverted thinking. It's most clear how this relationship must be when we think about extroverted intuition, for example, as a function that generates new ideas, and introverted sensing as a function that keeps track of the ideas you've generated and reviews the ideas you've generated and makes them internally known experientially. So obviously, if you're spending most of your time generating new ideas, you're not spending all the time you're spending doing that, it's time you're also not spending keeping track of the old ideas and going over them again. Obviously, there's a mutual exclusivity there, right? You can't have both happening concurrently. So as a consequence, it becomes pretty clear then that what it means to be a personality type and to have a reflexive set of cognitive functions is to spend most of your time in one attentional manner and not another. Now, C.S. Joseph might think that there's no reason why we couldn't arbitrarily switch and now all of a sudden for this stretch of time spend more time in this cognitive function or whatever. It doesn't work like that. We have a conscious stack, and it's true that trauma might push you into your 4th slot function. So when I'm traumatized by a loss or I'm in mourning or something, I'll spend more time on SI and less time on NE. And I think that's true for every type, that traumatic experiences compel them towards their 4th slot function. I wouldn't be shocked if, for example, Taylor, when he ran afoul of government oppression, at a certain point, he turned to his NI and accepted certain truths of things and changed his approach to it accordingly and make more outcome-oriented. Often in the reasoning, if the IEE, it's the intuitive, ethical, extrovert. So that's NEFI, that's ENFP. The IE enjoys making an impression with statements, and in this, what helps the IE is their usual self-assured tone. Often in their reasoning, there is an exaggerated false significance capable of imparting significance and blowing of importance to the most trivial and primitive statements. Well, okay. I still don't think he's an ENFP. So that people can be shaken from their default to their what you call wound licking setting, which is basically you flip the 1 and the 4. So you spend most of your time then doing your 4 and almost very little of your time doing the 1. And that's a response to trauma. It's a way to say, okay, I need to do things that are less fun, but more but consistently more self. It's the way that I naturally know how to help myself if I want to put in the work to do so. So, okay, you got that situation. You got a situation where it's true that, people can sort of flip their 1 and 4 frequency of use for a stretch of time in response to substantial trauma. But that doesn't mean that, in general, that people can access different personality types like that. You might say that a traumatized ENTP is going to act like an ISFJ. They don't become an ISFJ. They do retreat to their own SI a lot more than they naturally would, but that doesn't make them an ISFJ. It makes them an ENTP who's retreated to their SI. And it certainly is not the case that in other circumstances I go under my backstack and become an INTJ or an ESFP or anything like that. that just runs afoul of the whole idea of a personality being the imprint of habituated attentional channels. Because we pay attention in the same way over and over again, day after day, we have the same priority, the same sort of natural form of attention is our expression of being. Whenever I approach any situation, I'm ideating about it. I'm thinking possible things. I'm thinking words I might say. And it almost doesn't matter what kind of possible situation. I can think of a few situations where I might go in and be like, oh, I'm going to be super FE now because this is important to be super FE, and then sort of try to suppress the NE and focus on the FE for that stretch of time. To a certain extent, I can go NIFE. For example, when I'm playing music, I want everything to be NIFE. I don't want to be freestyling and making shit up on the fly. I want to be playing the songs exactly that I've practiced and know how they're supposed to be, and I want to execute them as I visualize them or envision them. You know. So that's the reality of it, that we might seek different metrics of attainment in different moments. We might understand things if we have a great deal of metacognition about it. We might understand how we need to prioritize the value of unconscious functions. We can prioritize those values using our conscious functions. We don't have to actually employ the unconscious functions to prioritize those values in that fashion. So, I mean, he has a very unnuanced understanding of cognitive functions. He doesn't get that they're attentional manners, that they're processes of being, and that you are who you are. That's, people don't change who they are. They may become markedly changed at some point by some extremely traumatic or difficult event or some extremely cathartic event, and pull a switcheroo where they go from being like neurotic to zen or something all of a sudden, or vice versa. In other words, they can function well, or they can be running on fewer cylinders than they ought to, right? And when people run on fewer cylinders than they ought to, when they're running non-optimally, when something's dragging them down or slowing them down or causing them problems, then naturally what's going to happen is they're going to express a less natural form of self. That's what it means, I guess, to be non-optimal. Or their natural form of expression is going to produce negative response or negative outcomes in the environment. One way or another, they're going to be troubled as a consequence. They're either having to function, one way or another, they're having to function outside of their natural inclinations, and they're not going to be able to sustain that for very long. So it's also true that circumstances will impact one's expression of self and one's amount of attention one gives to a given function. It is absolutely true that I give more attention now to SI than I did before I got with Kimberly. And it's absolutely the case. This is because she's an SI Dom and has been providing me lots of SI, and I sort of pick up the SI momentum without trying, without having to put a lot of effort into it. It's one of the rewards of duality. So it's true that the expression of the self can become more optimized, more balanced, or less balanced. Sometimes less balanced might be more optimal for a given purpose, but overall, the individual self needs to be balanced. You need to find time both for the extroversion, the putting of information out into the world, and also for the taking care of the self, the introvert sensing or the introvert feeling, or whatever your access to your core authentic being is. You got to spend some time on that. You got to spend some time on the disinterested kind. It's like you've got to find there's no way to tune yourself to make you optimal for all different expressions of self. You have to make some sacrifices. So I'm going to sort of optimize the self for well-being. For me, means I'm going to do less work, a little bit less work, and I'm going to be a little less driven, and I'm going to be a little bit more focused on being comfortable and eating well and those kind of things. So somebody might say, well, you're sacrificing your vision as an ambitious maker of stuff. Other people might say, well, no, you're realizing you're ambitious as an authentic being, your ambitions. It depends. I got heavy TE dosing from an ESTJ father, not easy as an INFP kid. Lol, I guess it was good for me in the long run. Well, I mean, for you, it probably didn't hurt a whole bunch because that's your dual, and you probably took to it in the way that you guys both understood. Poor Kimberly had an ESTJ mom, and she's an ISFJ. and she just basically got brutalized by TE, and then later on, her son kind of brutalized her with TI, and now I've been sort of cleaning up that mess, getting her to trust TI again. Andre says he's not a Chad. He's a wannabe Chad. Well, I don't know whether he's a Chad or not a Chad or anything like that, but I do know that he doesn't have good justifications for things. I've heard his videos before, and he doesn't actually give a why or a how or justify or defend or make reasonable arguments that can even be defended or justified. Most of his justifications seem to link back to the credibility of where he got the information, but this isn't the sort of thing that you can justify like that. There are things that you can justify like that, sort of. Well, this guy's an oncologist, and he's a cancer doctor, and his opinion about your cancer is more impressive than your experience with your opinion about your cancer. So, fine, okay, well, I guess very specialized thing it takes a lot of specialized training, whatever. This isn't that sort of thing. This is basically saying, here's some realities about human experience. We pay attention in different ways. Personalities seem to be persistent across a lifetime for almost all people. And we want to link those two in a way that makes sense. So we begin with a reality like deliberation is different than knowing, or knowing is different than action. And we begin with a reality that there are dynamic and static systems. That to interface with a dynamic system is its own form of attention. That it requires its own form of attention because it's not the sort of thing it's too dynamic a system to deliberate out and then act upon. You have to interface with it. And so when we recognize that these elements are at play in the putting, getting, and receiving of information, we can really model it out correctly. We can make a good case for why it's this way. We can we're right, which I am, and we can substantiate them based on both logic, basic human observations that are indisputable, such as deliberating, having to think of what the answer to something is different than already knowing it. That's a fact that nobody can really dispute. Those are different ways of paying attention. And so, when I'm not going to spend the time to articulate out the entire understanding of the thing right now, but to understand cognitive functions correctly is to understand what the human experience is as a simulatable expression of agency via and information in different ecosystems. It's not adequate to just learn something from a mentor and then position it as though it were true. From what I can tell, C.S. Joseph's got a mishmash of different notions for different places, which is fine. So do I. The problem is he doesn't have the capacity, interest, will, or willingness or something to do the TI work necessary to actually determine whether he's picked good things or not. It's got to all piece together into a complete, understandable, comprehensive model that withstands scrutiny. That is to say that anybody can critique. It's external to me. Anybody can read through my explanation of things. Anybody can critique it. Anybody can point to contradictions. Anybody can point to things and say, that's not consistent with real world data, or that's not consistent with what you said over here. And of course, it's undergone that process for a long time now. It's been refined by the fires of critique. The problem C.S. Joseph has is he's trying to avoid critique. And in an environment where you refuse to harden yourself intellectually via the critique of others, you become flabby, soft, intellectually flaccid. And that's the thing that is offensive to me. I don't mind somebody being intellectually flaccid, provided they're not presenting themselves as intellectually virile and convincing a lot of people that they are. He has no intellectual virility at all. He's intellectually flaccid. And I guess a lot of people out there think, wow, he's really ideating. He's really saying some things. But I want to be clear. He's not doing any ideation. He's just expressing stuff that he learned from somebody else, random places. He hasn't done any of the logical parsing that's necessary to articulate the correct understanding of things from the incorrect, or distinguish between those things. He's got lots of conclusions that are predicated on entirely false notions. So, for example, as I've already mentioned, he thinks extroverted intuition is the thing that he's doing all the time, which he's not. He thinks introverted thinking is his tool function. So he's obviously going to be wrong about everything he associates with introverted thinking. He thinks there are four sides of the mind that people can switch between types because he doesn't understand attentional manners. So obviously everything that follows from that is fruit from the poisonous tree. It's not going to be sound logically. It's not going to stand any scrutiny. It's not going to be valid. And anything other than his totally unwarranted confidence. So he does pitch a good woo, I guess. I mean, he's confident and guys. But for anybody who's capable of critiquing it independently of heuristics, we've got a couple different heuristics by which we can judge things. For people who can't or don't want to or don't have a conscious stack somewhere, TI, they'll use a couple different possible heuristics. One will be utility. So people without TI will come in and say, but yeah, but CSOs are people. Or the other one will be FE thing. So let's say, yeah, but he's displaying all the symbols of competence. So I'm just going to assume he actually knows what he's talking about. Neither of those heuristics will serve lead you to a falsehood, namely that he's competent and knows what he's talking about. He's not competent. He doesn't know what he's talking about, whether he's helping people or not. Look, I could help a bunch of people by offering them placebos and telling them they're not placebos. No, this is real medicine. And rely on the placebo effect to afford me some legitimacy. That's basically what he's doing with his metaphysicianry. He's pretending as though he's a metaphysician, that he actually knows something about metaphysics, that he can provide meaningful words to people about their ontology. But he's actually a charlatan, a quack. He doesn't know anything. He's wrong about fundamental notions, and therefore all the conclusions he draws from those wrong fundamental assumptions are themselves suspect, naturally, and we shouldn't afford them any credence. So, I think for those of you who were in C.S. Joseph's forum or live stream or whatever it was, and offering those comments about me not substantiating my points and stuff like that, that's simply nonsense. My points are well substantiated. You'll note that I haven't cursed at all. I haven't called them any names. I haven't made any personal attacks at all. Last time was, did I get a little, a little muddy? Did I get down in the mud a little bit? Yeah, sure I did. Did he deserve it? Of course he did. For all the reasons I already articulated. He's positioning himself as correct, telling other people this is good, reliable information, and that I, C.S. Joseph, am a credible source that you should listen to. And those things are lies. He's not a credible source. Nobody should listen to him. He doesn't have any competency. He's not done any of the parsing work. He's not logically sound. And he can't even respond to any of my critiques in a meaningful way. He won't address any of them head on and say, well, okay, Eric made this point with this reason, and therefore I'm going to respond to that point and that reason. Instead, he will avoid responding to this. If he wants to impress me, go down this video, note all the points I made, articulate them all yourself, and then each in turn. That would impress the living fuck out of me, C.S. Joseph. But the day you ever do anything close to that, is the day I'm bad at predicting what you're going to do, I guess. You hear Mama there. I'm going to... Yeah, okay, hold on, Kimmy. Let me just wrap it up out here. I'll be right there. So, I know this is a short live stream, and I want to say sorry for that, for being short. I don't want anybody to feel cheated in their live stream, but I feel like I've said my piece about this additional C.S. Joseph stuff I wanted to say. From what I could tell, the basic critique I heard was that I didn't really make critiques that were well substantiated or well argued. in last night's video or yesterday's video. So here are a bunch of particularly cogent, relevant, salient, decisive, determinant critiques that, unless answered, stand on the flow and render the appropriate status of C.S. Joseph of illegitimate, not worthy of whatever. I mean, a lot of people do that, but I don't know. Try to have a little class, right? The end. Thanks, everybody. Love you. I love you all so much. I do.